Hello everyone, this is Congrats here. Welcome back to the channel, guys. At this point, the NHL's postseason has mostly been determined as most of the first round matchups have now been finalized. We're really just looking at one series that hasn't been determined yet out of the Eastern Conference, but we're basically good to go. So I've decided that I'm going to be going through and giving my opinion on three must-watch first-round matchups this NHL postseason that you guys need to check out, okay? Before I get into the video, I just want to say thank you all for your support. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you want more content like this one, and let's get into it. So starting off, series number one, we've got the Dallas Stars versus the Colorado Avalanche. This series has been in discussion for quite some time now, and there's been a lot of hype that's been building up for this series. The obvious reason for why you should watch this is obviously the whole Mikko Rantanen saga. Rantanen was originally a Colorado Avalanche player at the start of the season, and then due to a contract dispute for a potential extension, he's now been traded twice this year and is now with the Stars. And considering that these two teams are one of the better teams in the Western Conference, finishing second and third respectively, you're looking at a really good matchup here. Of course, I'm expecting that Rantanen is probably going to get some boos when he returns to Colorado in a Stars uniform, but he has looked pretty good for Dallas, and still the Avalanche are a pretty solid team this year. You're looking at two big name Stanley Cup contenders. Dallas proved themselves even more last year when they made it to the Western Conference Finals. The Avalanche have already won a Stanley Cup. That was back in 2022, and they're hoping to regain some dominance. For Nathan MacKinnon, he's had an Art Ross caliber season for Colorado. They've also gotten a great year out of Cale Makar, almost a historic season. And they've worked around the edges very nicely, and they've built in a pretty solid contender for this year. You're looking for both of these clubs having a high octane offense. You've got a lot of premier talent in the NHL coming from these two teams alone. I've already mentioned a few of them, but some other names that probably don't get a lot of love, like Ross Colton from Colorado, Jason Robertson, Wyatt Johnston from Dallas should also be considered. Not to mention the Stars are getting healthy. I just heard that they got back Tyler Seguin, who is coming back from, I think, hip surgery, so he's now back in the fold. You're also looking at strong defensive teams, some of the better defensive lineups in the NHL, and you've also got a unique goaltending matchup. I mean, Colorado has tinkered with their goaltending for most of this year. For Dallas, you've obviously got Jay Gottinger as their primary goaltender, and he's most likely going to be facing Mackenzie Blackwood, so you know, you're getting a very solid matchup, and it's going to be very interesting to see how these two teams go at it. Matchup number two, this is going to be a pretty obvious one. The Toronto Maple Leafs versus the Ottawa Senators. Obviously, this is the Battle of Ontario. It's the first time in like 20 years plus that these two teams are meeting each other in the playoffs, and you've got very unique storylines. This series only got determined literally last night as Toronto won their division and Ottawa locked up the top wildcard spot earlier in the week. So you've got a really unique, not just divisional, but a regional matchup between two rival franchises here. For Ottawa, this is their first taste of the postseason under this new core, first time since 2017, I think, that they've made the playoffs. While Toronto, this is their 9th straight season in the postseason, but they still have a lot to prove with only one playoff series win. You know you're going to get a lot of viewership because it's the Leafs. They're like the biggest market in the NHL. They've got tons of media coverage day in, day out, so you know that there's going to be a lot of eyes on this series. You've got a young Sens team that's hungry, ready to prove themselves, and is working with a lot of offensive fighting spirit and has looked very solid this year. And you got a Toronto team that has definitely changed its identity. You still have the same core players, you still got the same guys, and you know, this might be that series that you could maybe see an upset. I mean, considering Toronto's reputation as a team that underwhelms in the postseason and a young Sens roster that wants to prove themselves in the playoffs, you could maybe get an upset here. I don't want to say anything right away, but who knows what can happen, right? But this is definitely a series that you gotta watch. These guys have played each other 3 times this season. Ottawa won all 3 of the matchups in the regular season, and Toronto's got to prove themselves, right? So it's gonna be a big matchup no matter what. All right, matchup number 3, I've got the Winnipeg Jets versus the St. Louis Blues. This one's a matchup that I think might be a potential upset situation here. It really depends on how you look at it, but you've got one of the hottest teams that were at the beginning of the NHL season versus the hottest team currently within the latter half of the NHL season. The Jets had that fantastic start to the year where I think they were undefeated through their first dozen games or something like that, and they have been an absolutely workhorse of a team. You've got fantastic seasons from guys like Mark Scheifele, Kyle Connor, Nikolai Ehlers, Josh Morrissey on defense. They got Vezina caliber goaltending in Connor Hellebuck, who's most likely taking home that hardware this year. And you've got a Blues team that has, at least for the last, I'm going to say, month and a half or so, they've been one of the hottest teams in the NHL. They won 12 in a row, which was a franchise record for them. They've been getting stellar goaltending, stellar offense from their team, which has been a very well-balanced roster with a completely new identity ever since they brought in Jim Montgomery. So it's been a really incredible season for the Blues, and they have kind of caught a lot of people off guard. At the same time, this is the President's Trophy winner versus the second wildcard team in the Western Conference. The Jets won the President's Trophy this year as the best team in the regular season. The Blues, I mean, you could say they're a scrappy underdog, but this is more like a very strong, talented team that's, got a lot of grit and success, right? And you can't take them for granted. And because the Jets are the President's Trophy winners this year, we also have to bring in the question, does the President's Trophy's curse still have an effect? For those of you who may not be familiar with it, the President's Trophy has been sort of like seen as this cursed piece of hardware where whoever wins it ends up bowing out in a pretty terrible fashion in the postseason. And no one has won the Stanley Cup after winning the President's Trophy, I think, since the Blackhawks did like 10 years ago, like 2015 or something. So it's been a problem. And for the Jets, like, they're a team that's also historically not been very good in the playoffs. Some people have argued that they were overrated. I mean, you look at last year's first round series they had against Colorado as an example. They've got a lot to prove, and with the President's Trophy, if this thing really is cursed, then it who knows what kind of impact it's going to have. But this is a series that really is something that you could watch. You're going to get a lot of great offense. We're probably going to get some excellent goaltending in this series as well for Jordan Binnington versus Connor Hellebuck. The Blues still are a very viable candidate this year that could pose an upset, considering that they've had such an incredible hot streak near the end of the season, and it'll be interesting to see how things go. Anyway guys, but that's all I got, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.